This story is about a relationship that I had about 10 years ago when I was around 25. I had met a girl through my friends, and we really hit it off. Her name was Katie, and we had a lot in common, so it wasn't long before we started dating. Things were going really well at first, and it wasn't long before she was staying over at my place a few nights per week. I had a one-bedroom apartment on the 12th floor of a really nice building. It was a little out of my price range, but I managed to keep up with the rent by cutting other expenses. Having a nice place is and was really important to me. It would also be a little embarrassing to bring a girl to a hole-in-the-wall apartment like I had before this place. On the 4th or 5th time she stayed over, I woke up in the middle of the night with an anxious feeling. I felt like I was being watched, but I sat up and looked around, and there was nothing there. I slumped down against the headboard of my bed and looked down at Katie, who was fast asleep. I figured that it must have been a bad dream that I couldn't remember. I would get those sometimes. I would feel all the anxiety from a terrible dream, but have no memory of what actually happened. It's a weird feeling, but I didn't worry about it at the time. Another time when Katie was over, I woke up again with the same feeling, but this time, as soon as I opened my eyes, I could see Katie's face in front of mine. I jumped from shock. Her normally pretty face was surprisingly creepy in the dark. The only source of light was a slight glow from the open window, but as soon as I realized it was her, I calmed down. "Whoa, you scared me," I whispered. She didn't speak. She just stayed still, leaned over staring at me. I don't think I saw so much as a blink. After an awkward 10 or 15 seconds, I placed my hands on her shoulders and gently laid her back down on her side of the bed. Then I went back to sleep. The next morning, I brought it up while we were eating breakfast. As we sat at my kitchen table, I told her that I woke up and she was staring at me, her eyes wide open, but she insisted that it never happened. Not that she didn't remember, but that it didn't happen, and she was really quite defensive about it. I decided not to push the issue any further, although I knew that it did happen. At the time, I believed that she was probably sleepwalking, and that she was sensitive about it. I figured it was not worth it to convince her that I was right. However, I was still creeped out, because I thought that sleepwalkers had closed eyes. I googled it later though, and found out that eyes are often open for sleepwalkers, so maybe it was that. Nothing happened for the next several weeks, and other than this incident, the relationship was really going great. We had a number of fantastic group dates with our mutual friends, and things were progressing very quickly. We even started to discuss our future together. That would come to a halt very soon though. It was a night like any other at my apartment. We cooked dinner together like usual, then watched a movie on the couch and went to bed at around midnight. I awoke again in the middle of the night with that same feeling of anxiety. When I opened my eyes, Katie was not facing me like before. I immediately looked to her side of the bed, but she was gone. I was confused for 2 or 3 seconds until I looked forward. Katie was standing in front of my bed, the open doorway behind her. Her long black hair covered most of her face, but I could see her wide open eyes looking at me, a blank expression on her face. I blinked a few times while my eyes were adjusting, and when I did, I noticed something terrifying. In her right hand, she was holding the large chef's knife from my kitchen. "Katie, what are you doing?" I asked. She just stood there swaying. A creepy smile slowly appeared on her face. With that, I had seen enough. I quickly threw on some clothes and got out of there. I had to pass right by Katie with the knife in order to get out of the room, but she didn't make a move. She just stood there and let me leave. I slept in my car that night, and the next day, I broke up with her over the phone. Again, she insisted that nothing happened, and even accused me of making it up to get out of the relationship. That was the furthest thing from the truth. To make matters worse, she convinced all of our mutual friends that I was making it up, and they all took her side. I went my own way, and made new friends after that. I didn't talk to any of them for years after that. However, I did find out through Facebook that Katie began dating our friend Andrew after this incident. I hadn't heard anything about them in years until I ran into Stephanie at the grocery store. It had been a long time since the incident, so it was all water under the bridge to me. When I locked eyes with Stephanie, it seemed like she'd seen a ghost. I started walking over to her smiling, but her face looked frightened and timid. I figured that she thought I'd be mad, so I walked over to her and gave her a big hug to show her that there were no hard feelings. It didn't seem to work though, because as soon as I let her go, I noticed that she was crying. I stood there confused for a few seconds, then I led her outside to the parking lot so we could have a little more privacy. She eventually calmed down, and when she did, I found out why she was crying. She told me that shortly after Katie and Andrew started dating, Katie had stabbed Andrew to death in his sleep. Stephanie gushed for several minutes about how I was right and about how wrong everyone was for doubting me. How if only they had listened to me, then Katie may have gotten the help she needed before it was too late. This incident is something that will stay with me forever. Although I tried to say something at the time, not a day goes by that I don't feel guilty for not doing more. I let the issue go and moved on with my life, a luxury that Andrew will never have. I met a guy named Andre on a dating app a few years ago. I'm 30 now, but I was 26 or 27 back then. Andre was 24. He was very handsome with a great sense of style, straight teeth, and intense eyes. I was immediately attracted to him. Right off the bat, though, I noticed that I was doing all of the work and carrying on the conversation on the app. That was unusual for me, since usually the guy takes the lead, but I kept talking to him anyway. Eventually we met, and the first date went really well. I could tell, though, that Andre was really a shy and awkward guy. I was really responsible for driving the conversation, and after we started dating, I was completely planning all of the dates. He would never text me first, and I was always the one taking the lead. I was doing really well in my career at the time, and I had recently bought my first place, a small 2-bedroom detached house with a single story. Andre, on the other hand, was not as established. He still lived with roommates. Because of that, the dynamic in the relationship kind of felt like mother-son to some extent. Not exactly what I was looking for. On a positive note, he was really great with my dog Beefcake, who is a purebred English bulldog. I think a great judge of character for a person is how they interact with animals. There's something that animals can sense in people that other humans can't. That doesn't mean that they can't be wrong sometimes, though, and this time, my dog was definitely wrong. We had been seeing each other for a few months when I decided to end things. I was feeling unappreciated because he was really not pulling his weight in the relationship. I also sensed a certain level of apathy from Andre, like he didn't really care if we were together or not. That's why I broke up with him. We met at a park near my house and sat down at a park bench. I made some small talk first, then I broke the news to him. When I did that, I was shocked by his reaction. He immediately burst out crying like a baby. His face turned beet red as large tears poured from his eyes. His nose was running, and every few seconds he would make a loud snorting noise. I was expecting the feeling to be mutual, for the reasons I described. It seemed that the relationship was not working on either end, so I was surprised that he reacted the way he did. We sat there for several minutes while Andre sobbed and begged me to reconsider. That only further cemented my decision. I was done with him, or so I thought. I had moved on and even went on a few dates. Nothing really worked out, though. After a few weeks, I started getting calls from Andre. He would call me late at night, often crying and begging me for another chance. This guy really didn't have control over his emotions, and with every call, I became more and more repulsed by him. I eventually told him to stop calling me, then I blocked his number and deleted him from all social media. A few more weeks went by, and I thought the whole thing was over. Unfortunately, I was very wrong. One Sunday afternoon, I was alone at home, and Andre showed up. He rang my doorbell first, but I tried to pretend that I was not home. I had security cameras covering my porch and backyard, so I watched him on my computer screen as he stood there. He gave up ringing after a while, but he didn't leave. I zoomed in on his face, which had a lifeless expression. He wasn't crying or anything, just a stone-cold frown. After a few more minutes, I walked to my front door where Andre was waiting on the other side. I said, "Go away, Andre, or I'm calling the police." He didn't reply. Then I went back to my computer to watch him on the camera. He looked up at the camera once, then he started pounding on the door with his shoulder. That was when I decided to call the police. I had no choice. Andre was arrested that day. He spent a few days in jail, but to my horror, he was granted bail. I didn't sleep the night when he was released. Ever since that incident, I had my brother stay over at my house. A few weeks went by with no further trouble, so I thought it might be over, but it wasn't. I woke up one Saturday morning at 6 a.m. and let Beefcake out into the backyard. Then I went for a run. When I came back, Beefcake was gone. At first I figured that he must have squeezed through the wooden fence somehow, so I jogged around the neighborhood looking for him. He wasn't the fastest runner, so he couldn't have gotten far, I thought. After a few hours, I decided to take a break. Like I said, I had a security camera covering the backyard, so I took a look at the footage to see if I could find out which way he went. When I watched it, however, I saw something terrifying. Caught on camera was Andre climbing my fence. Once he was inside, he took Beefcake by the collar and led him through the gate and closed it behind them. That guy stole my dog. I immediately called the police and reported it to them. Andre was quickly arrested again, this time for kidnapping my dog, but the police were not able to get him talking. He wouldn't say a word, and he never told anybody what happened to my dog. Like I said, the one redeeming quality of Andre's was that he was really good with the dog, so I like to tell myself that there's no way that he would hurt him. I only hope that he had the decency to find a good home for him, but that's far from certain. I broke up with my girlfriend Susan last year. We had only been dating for a few months, but even in that amount of time, there were a number of red flags which were the reason I decided to end things. One time I caught her looking through my phone even though it was locked with a password. I figured that she must have looked when I was entering at one time, and remembered it so she could unlock my phone later. Also, some of my friends would say that she would ask them some really strange questions about me. Things like where I was and what I was doing on particular days. These incidents, among others, were the reason that I decided to end the relationship. When I told her, she didn't scream or cry or anything like that. There was just this cold look in her eyes, like she was staring daggers at me. It was a really creepy thing, but I figured it would pass, so I moved on with my life. I had an apartment to myself at the time. It was on the second floor of an older apartment building. It was 3 floors total and made of red brick. I would guess that it was at least 100 years old, and it was just outside of the downtown area. There was an older intercom system that people could use to buzz guests in. I think that part was from the 90s or something, because it didn't connect to our phones like the newer ones. It was a speaker box on the wall. Even though you weren't supposed to let random people in, most of my neighbors would just buzz anyone up who rang. A few weeks after the breakup, I started to get a strange feeling in my apartment. It was like there were things in there that were out of place. I'm a very tidy and organized person, so if something's wrong, I notice it right away. It was mostly small things, like the door to my bedroom was open, even though I always close it. And even smaller things like that, my towel in the bathroom was shifted over slightly on the towel rack. I know it sounds minuscule, but I really pay attention to stuff like that, and it was making me feel uneasy. Obviously my mind went to Susan, but I didn't think it was her since I never gave her a key to my apartment. So even though she could have gotten into the building through the outdated buzzer system, I didn't think she could get into my place. Also, the second floor window was really hard to get to. I convinced myself that it was just my imagination, and didn't worry about it for a while. Things kept happening though, that had me worried. I started to notice articles of clothing were missing, and not just a sock that could have been lost in the laundry. My favorite pair of blue jeans were gone. I also noticed that my bed, which is always made tidily, was looking like a mess. Like someone had unmade it, then haphazardly tossed the duvet somewhat back in place. I knew for a fact that I would not have left it like that, so I was starting to feel seriously worried. One night, I came home late from a night out with friends, and as soon as I stepped into my apartment, everything felt off. I turned on the lights and stood in the doorway for a few seconds looking around. I felt a presence in that place, but nobody was there. I took a deep breath, then said, "Hello," but there was no answer. Then I took off my shoes and started cautiously making my way through my apartment. I checked the living room and kitchen, which were actually the same room. Then I poked my head into the bathroom and turned on the light. There was nobody there. Finally, I stepped into the bedroom and also turned on that light. It seemed to be empty as well. I bent down and looked under my bed, and the coast was clear. I was beginning to feel relieved at this point, but I did have a closet in the bedroom, and I knew that was the last place that anybody could be hiding. So I walked slowly to the closet door and took one final look around before opening it. I reached for the handle and slid the door to the side. When I looked down, Susan was sitting there with that same cold expression on her face that I saw when we broke up. She had been sneaking into the apartment all this time. Although I was extremely terrified, I was also relieved there was finally an explanation for the strange things that had been happening. I immediately closed the closet and ran out of my apartment and down the street, then called 911. The police came and arrested Susan, who was still there when they arrived. After a few hours of interrogation, The police discovered that Susan had managed to make a copy of my keys at some point while we were together. I tried, but I couldn't think of a time when she would have had access to them for long enough to make copies. That was especially creepy to me, because it shows that she was planning something like this before we even broke up. She was never charged legally, but she was ordered by the court to attend therapy, and a restraining order was placed against her as well. After that, I moved out of that apartment and back in with my parents who live in a different city. I haven't heard from her since, and I haven't tried to find out anything about her or her progress in therapy. Although this was the worst experience of my life, I actually do wish the best for her. I broke up with my girlfriend after 6 months of dating. Her name was Jillian. We met through Tinder, which is usually a bit of a red flag, but at first everything was fine. She was easy to talk to, funny in her own way, and we liked a lot of the same things. There was some common ground on movies, music, and other stuff. But after a while, I started feeling weird about it. She got clingy fast and always wanted to be in constant contact. She texted me first thing in the morning and kept messaging all day. If I didn't respond within 10 minutes, she'd double text, sometimes triple. At first I brushed it off, but it started to wear me down. I waited longer than I probably should have to break up with her, and I didn't think she'd handle it well. The few times we'd talked about exes, she described them in ways that made me nervous, like they were all either villains or cowards. That's why I planned it carefully. I decided to do it at her place, figuring it would be easier to leave if things got weird. I sat her down and told her I didn't think it was working anymore. I said I needed more space, and that I didn't feel like I was the right person for her long term. I expected tears or maybe shouting, but instead, she just sat there quietly and nodded. She asked a few questions, but didn't push. Then she walked me to the door and said she hoped we could stay friends. I was honestly surprised, because I thought it was going to be ugly, but she seemed calm about it. I still walked back to my car kind of tense, because I was expecting her to text me something angry once I drove off, but she didn't. She didn't message me for several days, and when she did reach out, it was casual stuff. She sent some memes, little updates, but nothing intense. I figured maybe I'd misjudged her. Maybe she just took it better than I thought she would. A few weeks went by, and I got busy with work and tried not to think too hard about dating again. Then Jillian texted and said she wanted to hang out, just as friends. She asked if I wanted to come by for a drink and catch up. She said she understood if it was weird and told me I could say no. I ended up saying yes because it seemed really casual. I thought it might help things feel more normal between us, and I didn't want to be cold for no reason. When I got to her place, she was in a good mood. She gave me a hug, offered me a drink, and we sat in the living room for a bit. It was vodka and orange juice, I think. She handed it to me in a big glass and said she'd already had one herself. I took a few sips while she talked about her job and some family stuff. Then things started to feel strange and the room got hazy. I tried to stand up, but my legs were heavy. That's the last thing I remember before blacking out. When I woke up, I was tied to a rolling desk chair, the kind with armrests and a high back. It was in her bedroom, right in front of her computer. My wrists were duct taped to the armrests, and my ankles were tied to the legs of the chair. At first I thought maybe I was dreaming or hallucinating, but I blinked a few times, and everything stayed the same. The lights were low in the room, and there was music playing from her speakers. It was some playlist with slow indie songs. I looked over, and Jillian was sitting on the bed, scrolling on her phone. When I moved, she looked up and said, "Oh good, you're up." I asked her what was going on. My mouth was dry, and my head felt like it was filled with cotton. She didn't answer me directly. She just said, "You look tired. I thought you could use a nap." I told her to let me go, and tried to sound calm about it, but she just shook her head. "I just want to talk," she said. "You never really gave me closure." I tried to play along and told her I'd been thinking about her, and that maybe I made a mistake by breaking up. I asked her if we could talk things through after she let me go, but she didn't believe me. She stared at me for a long time, and then said, "That's not how you talk when you mean something." Then she got up and walked over to me. I didn't know what she was going to do, but she just looked me over and said, "You're not a good liar." Then she sat back down and opened her laptop. She didn't do anything violent, and she didn't threaten me. She just kept me there and kept talking. She rambled about how hard the breakup had been, and how I didn't understand what she was going through. I kept trying to be understanding, even though I was really mad. I kept saying that I understood, and tried not to upset her. I wasn't sure if she'd drugged me with something, or just spiked the drink enough to knock me out, but my head still felt off. This went on for a while. I don't know how long exactly, but at least an hour, maybe more. She'd get quiet for a while, then start talking again. Sometimes she'd laugh at something she remembered, like it was a normal night. I kept trying to act like I cared, hoping she'd decide to trust me, but every time I tried to steer the conversation toward leaving or undoing the tape, she shut it down. Eventually, I heard footsteps outside in the hallway. Someone was walking past her apartment, maybe heading toward another unit, so I started yelling. Not screaming frantically, but loud enough that someone in the hall might hear. I yelled her name a few times, then just started shouting, "Help," over and over. Jillian jumped up immediately and rushed over to cover my mouth with her hand. She looked panicked for the first time. "Are you crazy?" she whispered. I kept yelling, even with her hand trying to muffle it. I moved around in the chair to make it louder, hoping the sound would carry through the door. I don't know if the person was listening, but I didn't stop. Jillian looked toward the front of her apartment, then back at me. A second later, she sighed and said, Okay, fine." She went to her closet, pulled out a pair of scissors, and cut the tape off of my arms. I just stood up slowly, watching her. She was breathing hard and pacing a little. "I was just messing with you," she said, forcing an awkward laugh. But I didn't believe her, and she knew I didn't. My arms hurt from being taped down for so long, so I moved them around to get the blood flowing. "I thought you'd think it was funny," she said. I walked past her without responding, then went straight to the door and opened it. The hallway was empty, so whoever had been walking by earlier was gone. I left without saying anything else, and she didn't follow me. When I got to my car, I sat there for a minute. I thought about calling the police, but I didn't. I didn't know what I'd even say. I knew she would deny it, and there were no marks on me, so I didn't want to drag it out any more than it already had been. I went home and blocked her number that night. She tried to message me from another account a few days later, but I blocked that too. I didn't tell many people what happened, just one close friend, and even then, I kept the details light. I still think about it sometimes, not every day, but enough. I haven't been in a real relationship since. It's not that I'm scared of dating, but I'm more careful now and probably have some trust issues. I was a new student at a small school in November of 2017. The size was around 50 kids in total. The reason I went there was because the things I was learning in my old school were way too advanced for me. I had to transition to a school where the work was way easier and where I could focus better. It's called the Smith School, and it's based in New York City. It used to be a school for kids who had a criminal history, but now it's changed to a place for kids who have special needs. I was there for almost a full year, and then I transferred into a bigger school. I was pretty much friends with everyone there because the school was so small. I even ended up dating a guy, and his name was Kyle Fernandez. I started dating him in February or March of 2018. The reason why he went to the Smith School was because he got kicked out from his previous school for selling weed to other students, and one person ended up telling on him. For the first 2 or 3 months of dating him, he was nice to me and to the people that went to our school, but at the same time he was also high on drugs most of the time. I never smoked weed, and I never will. Kyle would also take me to hang out with his other friends outside of school. They were also a lot like him. They were always smoking and selling weed. Also, they had their pants sagging, which would reveal their underwear. It was so eye-burning to see that crap, but Kyle loved me and I loved him. When Kyle and his friends did stuff that would get them in trouble, I would stay out of it, and thankfully, Kyle never pressured me to join them. A few more months went by, and our relationship stayed the same until one day in July. Kyle came over to my place at night. For an hour, we were just chatting in my bedroom until my phone started going off. It was a bunch of text messages from my friend Liam. I opened them, and I saw that he sent me a bunch of edgy but funny memes. I started laughing hard, and Kyle then asked me who was texting. I told him that it was my friend Liam. He then asked if he could see the texts. I then responded saying, "Please, it's really nothing. He's a longtime friend who makes me laugh all the time." Kyle then got really upset with me and demanded a look at my phone. My smile faded away, and I felt a little skittish. I then muttered the word, "No." Then he grabbed my phone and threw it at the wall. It hit a lamp and glass went everywhere. On the floor, the top of my drawer, and on my bed. I was in disbelief at what just happened. As a reaction to what Kyle just did, I put my arms up to my face because I didn't know what he would do next. I then felt his hand grab my left arm, and he did something that made me change how I saw him as a person. I saw a glass in his hand, and before I could even say anything or move, Kyle plunged it into my arm so fast, and then took it out 2 seconds later. I screamed so loud that Africa could probably hear me. As I was still screaming, Kyle then yelled at me, "You happy now?" Then he ran out of my room and out of my apartment. I really wish my mother was home, but of course she wasn't. I then ran right to my bathroom and washed the stab wound with soap and water. It was hurting like hell when I did that. I then got a humongous bandage and put it on my left arm. After doing that, I went back to my phone, took the shattered screen protector off, and proceeded to block Kyle on everything. If he tried to come and see me again, I'd make it clear that I never wanted to see him. To my shock, he never came to my house, and I never saw him on the streets again. I kept what Kyle did to me a secret, and when anyone asked me what happened between us, I just said that our relationship was not going in the right direction. Everyone actually seemed to believe me. I didn't let anybody know what the real reason was because I was just too scared. But then something happened in the summer of 2023. It was early August, and I was at work that day. Suddenly, I felt my phone vibrating in my pocket. I took it out to see who was calling me, and it was a number starting with 212. For people that don't know, 212 is an area code that's from New York City. I was curious to see who was calling me, so I picked up the phone and said, "Hello?" I heard a woman on the line asking if this was me. I replied back saying, "Yeah, that's me. Who's this?" I then heard the woman say, "This is the 42nd Street New York Presbyterian Hospital calling, and I'm here to inform you that your mother, along with 10 people, have been hit by a car, and she's in critical condition." As I heard this, I felt my hand shaking while holding the phone. I tried staying composed and said, "I'll be there right away." I ran out of my workplace really fast, without telling anyone where I was going or what happened. I got to the hospital in about 10 or 15 minutes. I asked where my mom was, and a woman at the front desk said that she was in a room right down the hall. I ran over to that room, and when I got there, I saw that she was in a coma. I sat down next to her crying like I'd never cried before. A nurse came in, and I asked her for the details of the incident. The nurse said that a man stole a car while intoxicated and drove on the wrong side of the street. Then he went onto a sidewalk and hit a cyclist, your mom, and 5 others. I was so taken aback hearing this that I asked if they found out the guy's name yet. The nurse said, "We don't know yet, but we'll probably get an answer tomorrow." The next day came, and there was both amazing and terrible news. I'll start off with the good news. The good news was that my mom woke up. The bad news was that the person who drove the vehicle was Kyle. I was in such disbelief. I really wanted to make sure that he would not get away with this. Thank God he got tackled by good Samaritans on the street, and that the police had him in custody. I wanted to scream so badly, but I would just be humiliating myself by doing that. Another part about the bad news is that a couple of days later, I would find out that my mother would never be able to walk again. I felt as if my life was over. When this news story broke out all around the country, everyone thought this was a terrorist attack. I wrote a letter to the court about the time he assaulted me with the shattered glass. After this was read out in court, another woman who Kyle dated in 2022 came forward about how she was also a victim of Kyle. This warmed my heart because she felt inspired to tell her story as well. In the end, Kyle was found guilty and he was sentenced to 2.5 years behind bars, but that sentence is way too short. It should have been 20 years because of the 7 victims he unintentionally hit with his car. Most of them were left with lifetime injuries. He must have hired an amazing lawyer to get such a short sentence. I have nothing but hatred for Kyle, now after what he did to my mother. People like him never change. I know I might be taking things out of proportion, but I'm never going to get over this. While Kyle's serving his time in prison, I hope he reflects on his actions and changes as a person. My advice to him is that he should move out of New York City and start a new life. If anyone's interested, there's a video of Kyle getting tackled online, and it went viral. The video shows Kyle getting taken down by 3 men and being confronted for what he did. He would later deny that he did it, which shows that he's a liar and has no remorse for what he did. For the people living in New York City, when Kyle gets out of prison and you see him on the street, avoid him at all costs because you don't want to be his next victim.